Hello, and thank you guys for joining this UGC webinar on behalf of Backstage. Who I have here with me are three creative directors, creative strategists, video creators, all focused on UGC style of content. We have Jonathan Delegado, who has been in the video marketing industry for over 25 years, collaborating with brands like Budweiser, Nike, Microsoft. Um, then we have Haley Ayres, who's a senior creative strategist at QuickFrame. She's been with QuickFrame for 4+ years, based in LA, oversees all projects that come through um, for with their channel partners, specifically TikTok, NBA, which are all UGC style of projects. We have Patrick Walsh from Playhouse, who has been a freelance creative for a decade, with the most recent 5 years focused on UGC and UGC style of creative. He's also been given the opportunity to create campaigns for some of the world's largest brands like Adidas, Bumble, DoorDash, Jiffy Lube, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you guys for being here.
Good. Thanks for having
Awesome. So to get started, I want to hear from each of you just a little bit more about why you guys think UGC is such a powerful tool in today's marketplace.
I would say that consumers are really looking for brands that are speaking to them in a more authentic way and giving the consumers a little bit more ownership on how the brand is perceived versus the brand telling the consumer how they want to be perceived. Uh, that is probably the base of why UGC exists today.
Yeah, Jonathan, I don't know if you want to chime in, but I think from like a production side of things, I'm sure both of our brains kind of went to the spot of, from a budget standpoint, there's a lot more opportunity because you're generally working, with a smaller budget, or you're creating more assets for the same budget. So there's a lot more opportunity to try new things or niche down and speak to specific, markets or demographics.
speak to it. I think both of those are awesome points. I think our market, our world has become so incredibly noisy, and there's more information being pushed out than ever. I mean, this just gets exponentially worse year over year over year over year with all these channels and all of these brands and businesses trying to get your attention. And this has created this lack of trust. There's been this arc of trust that has gone down and down and down. And I think we see this across all kinds of stuff in our entire society, but particularly as it pertains to marketing. So in a world where there's a degrading trust and trust is going down, we trust people we know. We trust people we see that look like us, sound like us, act like us. And at its heart, that's the best UGC. The best UGC is when you see a person and you go, oh, look at that, that little funny thing she does. That's just like my aunt, you know, and then you build trust. So I think really effective, well done UGC is standing out in the marketplace right now, and it should.
Can you guys can you guys share a specific campaign where UGC outperform traditional branded generated content? Because I think, kind of like what you were guys saying, that's where it's going, right? Like not only is production getting cheaper and cheaper, but people are just, kind of leaving it out completely. It's, startups, people who are really focused on, really kind of building that trust with people. And then, and I think also with just the rise of AI, people don't like things like too well done in a way. You know what I mean? So yeah, can you each share a specific campaign where UGC outperformed traditional, branded generated content that you guys did?
I work a lot with some big enterprise QSR brands, Panera and Subway specifically, through our TikTok channel partnership. And they come to us like monthly to accompany um, their, big TV campaign shoots for content that is specific just for TikTok, okay, UGC content. And instead of in the past, like a lot of brands would just take the TV campaigns, cut it down, change the aspect ratio, but they are coming to us to create content specifically for these platforms, this UGC style, because they have found that it outperforms the big commercial shoots time and time again.
I just finished up a campaign that was fantastic. We did both UGC and broadcast in the same 2-day production. I'm not going to say the name of the brand. And what was really fascinating to me is, in addition to creating 5 or 6 assets that were pure UGC, and we cast for the UGC, and producing 2 assets for CTV and OTT. In addition to that, we took our favorite bits from the UGC and did a mashup for broadcast. And that ad outperformed everything. And I just love that happened. And I love that they did both of those things at the same time, and we cast separately for them, because I think it improved both productions. You know, the people doing the CTV ads were influenced because we were shooting the UGC at the same time on the same sets. So they were watching the spontaneous, really, these people who knew how to tell stories. But then the CTV people came onto set and they had scripts, but it made their script feel so much better. So that's a cool story I like about how UGC is just really, really hitting right now.
Yeah, and I think like off of that, something else that's just like important about UGC is I think the accessibility that it brings to just like a wider array of brands. The brands that might not be able to afford traditional, like on TV commercial spots. This allows them to not only be seen and have a presence in the advertising space, but it also lets them talk directly to their audience that they're looking for.
Definitely, definitely. Um, I read a stat recently on Slack that says, you know, 84% of millennials say UGC influences their purchasing decisions. So, kind of a little bit like you were saying, Jonathan, of just like, that UGC content influenced the CTV, ads that they were seeing, and influenced kind of that performance on that side. Um, so yeah, no, definitely some great points. What do you think is the most important elements to include in a UGC creative brief to ensure both creative freedom and brand alignment? I think that's probably the one of the biggest points, right? We're just trying to be aligned, with that with that creator. So what do you guys think are you know the most important elements in regards to that UGC creator brief?
Yeah, I think it's such a fine balance of making sure we're staying on brand and hitting on all the key messaging, but really letting the talent pretty much guide the creative, and having them speak in a way that is very natural to the talent. So, you wanna hit on all the key points, but also wanting to make sure that it doesn't come off inauthentic, that they're, like seem like they're just literally reading from a script, and then it kind of loses its, the trust of, like, why we're watching the video and, why we should purchase the brand. As a consumer myself, those are the videos that I can are more attracted to are the ones that I feel like it's a friend telling me about this brand, in an honest way versus, um, someone who is reading from a script that I could get from their website and why I should purchase the brand.
So in that sense, Haley, are you kind of giving them like points to address versus coming up with an actual script? Or like, what are you doing in that situation?
Yeah, so for a lot of our the brands that come in, some are very lenient and they say like, "Can you just hit on these 5 key messages?" And pretty much like you take it away or the talent takes it away. Unfortunately, there's a lot of brands that like they do have legal reviews that have to happen and we have to have like fully fleshed out scripts before we move into production. But like the main thing we tell the talent is that even though you do have to read line by line, still like, some of those filler words, like use it in your own like language versus sounding robotic.
Almost like coming up with your own script that just is more tailored to your voice,
Exactly.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Haley just said, and to kind of just add to it, I think if we're talking about like what's the important elements of a brief, um, I think it's making sure that the client or the brand that's writing the brief um, is accurately portraying, I guess, like the working process, because Haley kind of touched on, some clients are very flexible with what they're looking for. They're kind of just looking for something that's very engaging and are less stressed about, word perfect on their, brand mission statement. Other clients are, very rigid, whether it's for legal, whether it's for, other reasons. And both can be worked with. I've worked with Haley a bunch, and so I know that she handles it well. I trust Jonathan handles it well as well. But I think as long as the client is accurately portraying how they're going to proceed, it's easy to adapt. If upfront and in the brief, you can share that, hey, we are going to have a legal review, both at after we write the scripts and after we, get first edits. That's good, to understand all the way through the production process. It's when you are feeling really creative, you're having a lot of fun, all the email chains are, excited, and then you get a surprise email 3 weeks in saying, oh, now we need to go take it to legal, and legal nixes everything. That's when you get in some trouble, and no one's happy. So understanding that from the beginning, I think is one of the best things that a brief can convey to the creative.
I'll add on because I think this is a really great question. I think that crafting good briefs and casting with the brief and product in mind is critical. And I've seen very recently really long 5-page briefs for little 20-second videos. And I've also seen briefs where it's go at it, do what you think, do what you feel. And I've seen both ends of the spectrum, and both can work. The question is, what is the brand? And like Haley was saying very correctly, if it's say it's a SAS brand and it's very technical and the language has to be correct, yeah, no, they probably got to write some scripts. So matching your product and what you need from this with the creator, are you looking for a creator who's a storyteller? Are you looking for a creator who can do technical jargon really well? For an explainer, more of an explainer position than a vibe thing. So the brief is really, I mean, for us as producers, where we can really shape the project, both match the brief with the client, with the creator you've chosen, and get the language right. You watch this creator's stuff and you say, okay, she's a great storyteller. Obviously, they didn't tell her those lines. Who could? Let's let this person go free. Versus you find a creator who might be very attractive or might have some, real able to speak fast or some other attribute that really works for your project. But maybe they kind of stick to trends. Maybe they're sticking to the kind of things we see out there. They might need a script. So dialing that in is really for us as producers, where we can really add value.
And so when you guys are doing those briefs and creating kind of the different sides of the spectrum in terms of a UGC creator, does one work more than the other? And and also, are you guys for most of the UGC style projects? Are you guys utilizing both? Are you utilizing the UGC creator that you kind of let kind of keep their authentic voice 1,000%, and also the UGC creator where there's it's a little bit more driven by the script? Are you guys using both of those usually when you guys are doing UGC style projects?
I think that's where the difference between influencer content and UGC content come into play because it is this perfect in between of the brand still being able to have a lot of control over the content, but still having that authentic feel to it. I always tell brands, like, when you're signing up for this type of package, like, to be as flexible as possible with, how the talent comes across. We, like, send, a lot of different talent options for them to choose from, and they're able, like, to kind of see how the talent has performed before. Um, so a little bit of control of, like, knowing what that talent is going to perform like before they move forward with that talent, but also still getting to be able to control a little bit more of the messaging versus a influencer campaign where an influencer is going to match more of their style, their personal style, um, versus the brand style.
Like Haley was saying, is when you're casting UGC, more often than not, what you're seeing in their reel or their portfolio is what the finished product is going to look like. And so I think that's like important to understand, just again repeating, the difference between UGC and influencer content. The one creative thing that I kind of do that is just like a personal choice is personally, I try to make everything comedy. Whether it's we're talking UGC or just me at the dinner table. And so, obviously comedy is one of those things that, timing and is important, or, inflection is important. And so if we're trying to, create just like a funny little skit, that's 6 seconds long, 10 seconds long, whatever it is, sometimes I just make it and send it to the talent and go, just do this. Do it exactly like this. There's no other instruction. Just make this. Put the camera where I did, say it like I did, and I'll do the rest in editing. You don't have to worry about it.
There's a lot more of that than I think people think, actually. I have to admit that more often than not, I've actually gone to set, so-called set, to help UGC creators with their productions. We like to pretend we don't, but we do. They need help sometimes.
Giving away secrets.
What are some mistakes that brands make when briefing, uh, when making a briefing, on UGC, type of projects, and how could they avoid those mistakes? I know you mentioned one, just kind of being too big on kind of, word for word scripting and stuff like that. But is there any other kind of things that you've noticed that are um, that hinder kind of that process and that in the within the project?
I think a missed opportunity sometimes of a brand thinking that they only want to hit on their target demo and casting a specific type of talent, when I think UGC has the opportunity to help a brand cast a wider net of what their normal target demo is, and speaking to a different, maybe, demographic that could be using the product in a different way. So I think, like, for example, I think it was like CeraVe. They did a great campaign with one of the grandmas that loves to do like story time. And like normally they're targeting CeraVe, like maybe like young 20s female, but they totally tapped into a different type of consumer by who they casted on the talent side of things. So I think it's not really a mistake, but I think brands need to be more open to what types of talent they're casting to speak to a different target audience.
I'll say that the mistake I see, or again, a missed opportunity, is brands looking at UGC as inexpensive advertising. An inexpensive way to do pay-per-clicks. I think pay-per-click ads. I think that's a missed opportunity, and I see that often with having that expectation of product shots and really hitting product attributes really hard, and really taking that authenticity and that why you're doing UGC at the heart of the matter away by dictating too much advertising speak in that work. And it's just a rigid thinking that can sometimes get in the way of effectiveness. So for me, it's just I do see that often, that they think, well, I can do one fancy production and I could get one asset, or I could do 25 UGC ads, and usually not the best approach.
Kind of like what you were saying before. It's like it kind of complements the more traditional ads versus act as sort of like a replacement,
Be different
so to
lanes,
speak.
and they need
Mm.
different focus and application.
Yeah, and I think, something that I've run into is, there is sometimes, I'm trying to struggle how to phrase it, but basically, there have been times where I'll deliver, V1 assets, edited together, and the feedback is, "Hey, what if the talent said it like this?" And it's something completely different. And I know this isn't, exclusive to UGC, but I think, because of kind of like the inexpensive view on it, sometimes some of the pre-production steps kind of get glazed over. And whether it's just not, I think a lot of it comes in the scripting phase where, whether it's not like paying attention to, the words that are on the page, because, for example, like I know I write emails very differently than I speak. And sometimes the script sounds very robotronic, and it just needs to be, a little more casual, but the instruction was word perfect. And so that's what, the talent delivers. And, I think the same thing goes for duration, where, we see a lot of success in the 15 to 30-second range. But, there are some scripts that, oh, it's only a paragraph, but it's a tight 60 seconds, and, you're losing your audience every second it drags on.
Yeah, going off of that, Patrick, like, what are kind of some recommendations in terms of like length and script? Because I think it's very similar, like in the film industry with script writing. It's something of like one page of dialogue equals to, I don't know, I think it's like 3 minutes on screen. um so yeah, in terms of UGC scripting, what are some guidelines around kind of making concise points and whatnot?
Yeah, so, saying, traditional scripts or screenwriting is 1 page, 1 minute. And, with UGC ads, we're working with a fraction of a minute. My biggest advice is read it out loud. Read it out loud at the pace that you envision it being performed. If I'm handing somebody a 25-page script, I'm not expecting them in their office to, read out loud for a half hour. But, when I'm, writing a draft, I will, read it at the pace that I imagine it being performed. And if it's 32 seconds, I'm looking to get it under the 30-second mark. And where can I shave 3 seconds? What two sentences can become one? And when scripts are starting to feel long, I share, I have my timer next to me, so I share that duration with the client, and then kind of ask them to do it for themselves as well. Because am I, reading it super fast or super slow? And then I think just throughout that process, it really highlights for, the client who is also the viewer, like, where does the script lag? Where am I losing my focus and I'm the one reading it? I think just those little practical demonstrations, are really illustrative of kind of like the weak spots or the unnecessary spots in an ad.
In the same way you speak is the way you write an email, I think that recording yourself doing a script is key. You really won't want it to be written language. You really want it to be in conversational language. And I find that highly valuable to just record myself sometimes. And when I'm trying to cut a script down, because you could feel it right away. And the other thing I like to talk about a lot is, and this is true of pretty much all marketing, whenever possible, show. don't tell. If you can show an idea, you're winning versus if you could tell someone how to feel or think.
Going back a little bit, when and for the people watching as well, when trying to implement UGC into marketing campaigns and whatnot, what are some of the challenges that you had with, whether it be, other team members, leadership, what have you? What are some of those unexpected challenges that you had when kind of first trying to implement UGC or implementing UGC in a different way.
I would say a lot of the brands that are more enterprise level, they were a little bit later to the game, which is fine, but, they have to tiptoe around a lot more situations than maybe smaller D2C brands. For example, like, they have to be super hyper aware about when it comes to, like, sounds, any third party like trademark logos. Not to say that any smaller brand should not be aware of that, but they're definitely like looked up under more of a microscope, just because of how big the brand is, their legal teams, and all that. Um, I think that they're also really used to this, traditional way of advertising of having an agency that is creating super, super high gloss commercial shoots, and always having the product look absolutely spotless. And, especially when it comes to like food, having food stylists on set versus like UGC, you know, it is how the food is delivered to the talent, and there's not much control that the talent has over that. And we can only, make the food look so good as without any professional food stylists, and that's just also comes down to budget. Like these small UGC projects like don't allow for that type like food stylist or makeup and hair, like all of those like traditional add-ons for big commercial shoots. So I think it's like making sure brands like understand that yes, the style is going to be a lot more scrappier, but it will come across a lot more authentic.
So often on set, more for CTV ads, we have people there from brands, and their entire job, and it should be, is to make sure that their brand looks awesome and that it's represented just how they want it to. So, it's hard to take that hat off. I appreciate that it takes a leap.
Something that I always, I try to suss it out at the beginning of any project is, kind of like the legal involvement. Because, I've had a client that I've had the opportunity to work with several times, and I can thankfully report that each time they have streamlined their legal reviews. But the first time I worked with them, I think it was their first UGC project ever. And they were kind of just, defaulting to all of the legal disclaimers that they would typically use for, whether it's CTV, OTT, or whatever. But on a vertical video, you're just cramming very fine text in a very small frame, and of course, it has to be title safe, so it's inching up the screen. And that was just to cover their basis and make sure that they would be in the clear. Over time, as they understand the medium and the platform more, I think generally restrictions have been loosened. But then I think at the same time, one of my first projects that probably happened just after working with the client I just described, I asked them about their legal process, and they laughed and told me, "Oh, it's very cute that you think we have lawyers." And so no two clients are the same, and beginning every project is going to be different. And so it's a lot about understanding where they're at and kind of like shepherding them to the real starting line, when you can actually be making creative decisions.
What are some, what performance metrics do you guys track, and what insights do they reveal about just the kind of overall effectiveness of UGC? Um, I know there, we Backstage recently had a white paper, and it discussed how, I think it was like 97% of Gen Z shoppers get buying inspiration from social media, and what dominates social media more than UGC. So yeah, I'm curious kind of what are some, performance metrics that you guys utilize to, track the effectiveness of UGC.
I will say not all brands will share their data with us, because we're more on, like, the production side of things versus, like, the media. But I will say, like, there's no, like, KPI we haven't had to, like, create content for. I would say for a UGC style, it's, um, brand awareness. Conversion is probably number 1. Um yeah, I would say conversion and then brand awareness, would be the top 2.
Yeah, I can just echo that and agree. It's kind of, everything kind of either falls into top of funnel, bottom of funnel. And, I think conversion is a little bit easier to track. Are people clicking and then are they buying? Awareness is a little bit more abstract. But as long as those goals and like what you're trying to achieve are clearly defined at the beginning of the project, I think it makes your outcome and what you're valuing analytic wise a little clearer, because if you're just about awareness, it's, retention rate and engagement. Are people actually watching the whole ad? If you're doing a more casual approach where you're not really mentioning the brand up front, are people sticking around to the end where the brand is mentioned? Because if not, you're just kind of occupying people's time for 3, 5, 10 seconds, however long they're sticking around.
Yeah, and I will say for, like, style-wise on how we create content for brand awareness versus conversion, I would say brand awareness, we definitely lean way more into, like, the current trends of what's going on in UGC versus, like, conversion being more direct, to why, a consumer should be purchasing. And to echo what Patrick said, I think adding in the brand, really, like, the first 3 seconds is, like, key because, you know, people are scrolling all day long and could easily just, like, ignore, the video if they don't even know what you're talking about per se, or brand.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Just how do those pieces of content differ at the, top level brand awareness side from the conversion side? So, um, thank you for that. What are factors that, brands and people of that nature should consider when selecting the right, UGC creator for a campaign? I know we discussed a little bit about, you know, influencer, versus kind of UGC, maybe smaller, kind of like nano influencer, or just, someone who just does, UGC stuff, and they might not have the biggest following. What are some of those factors to consider when selecting, the right UGC creator for a campaign?
Yeah, so because a lot of this content is it's, branded owned, so it's coming from the brand's channel, meaning that it does not matter the following that the talent has, which I think is, like, sometimes brands get caught up on, like, "Well, how many followers does this talent have?" And it's like, "Well, this is not an influencer campaign." So I think it's really important for them to understand that, maybe they have a TikTok, but maybe they don't, and that's okay. I think the most important thing is the video examples from the talent that is shared prior to the brand picking the talent, is examples that are from past, like, UGC projects in that style of, like, talking to your iPhone like you're talking to a friend, like, almost like on a FaceTime, like, that kind of style versus, like, their professional, like, reel that they were in a movie of, like, I think it's really it's such a different type of acting, that I think it's important for the brand to see how they interact with an iPhone versus a big production set.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because I always, being in the creative services space, I've always kind of said that, um, certain people who just really do UGC, they understand camera angles a little bit better. They understand lighting a little bit better. Than somebody who again has like maybe they have the look, but most of their reel is them acting, in commercials or what have you, So interesting point. Yeah.
It's also for or projects that we do, like let's say it's for a home furnishing brand. It's important that we get like video or pictures of the talent space because all these projects are being filmed in the talent's own environment. So they might be a perfect personality fit, but maybe their home is not the aesthetic that the brand is looking for. So it's also making sure that the environment is the correct aesthetic of that the brand is looking for based on the type of product that it is.
I think it's such a different animal. I mean, UGC creators, I think the best of them are storytellers, um, above and beyond actors. I'm not saying actors can't be awesome storytellers. It's funny, as a director, I've always said, I help actors be less like actors, and I help real people be a little bit more like actors. And the UGC is a lane all to its own because we really do want them to be user generated content. We really want them to generate ideas. We really want to feel them in the content. It's not always true. Like I said earlier, if you're, have a lot of technical jargon and you're really, really looking for a conversion ad where you're hitting the product attributes real hard, you can think maybe not, but I would argue still, maybe the language has to be as such, but that doesn't mean it can't be done in such a way that's your own. I mean, a brand will say these are the things we need to say, but we didn't say you couldn't be juggling while you said these things, or, whatever fun thing you could bring to the process to make it feel your own and real and get that relatability that at its heart, what makes UGC so high performing right now.
Yeah, and I think there's like the old phrase of walking is easy, talking is easy, but walking and talking is very, very hard. And that's kind of what UGC is in a lot of ways, where if you're, strictly like a traditional actor, you're going to set, you're being told where to stand, where to look, how to say it. You know what? Nope, let's say it a little bit happier, a little bit angrier. With UGC, the talent is also, directing themselves in a way. And so it is a different skill set, and kind of what Jonathan was saying is like it sits in between or on its own from traditional productions, and so I think when vetting talent in the casting process, looking at their camera movement, looking at their, lighting choices, which are, kind of like off of what Haley was saying sometimes, not so much choices and, well, this is the only window that provides light in my living room. And so, that's kind of like what you're limited to. Otherwise, you're going to have a very, very dark and grainy image. Yeah, you're not just, I guess, like auditioning performance, you're auditioning production in a way.
Is there any kind of in terms of just kind of the future of UGC, um, what are you guys thinking it's going to look like? Is it going to increase more? Is it going to be kind of this whole balance between UGC and traditional ads? What do you guys think about just kind of its growth uh in terms of just kind of in the marketing landscape?
I think it's here to stay. I might be a little biased, but I also like, with who knows what the future of TikTok is looking like, but it looks like it's going to be okay. But that just means like more brands are going to Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, like pretty much every platform speaks to this type of creative. So I don't foresee it going away anytime soon. Um, I think when we get back to the budget conversation, where, it's tougher economic times right now, and I think brands are going to continue to lean on that cheaper like style of content versus like continuing to spend a lot of money when marketing budgets are getting slashed. Um, I think that there's such now a network of talent that really excels at this type of content that I think like the infrastructure of UGC is like in a really good spot right now where brands are going to continue to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand how we got here to understand where we're going, because the pandemic was huge for UGC, and that's when UGC just exploded because it was the only way to make content. Um, but I don't think that that really would have been considered without YouTube and the long history of YouTube creators who were, I think, for better or for worse, viewed as real people inserting, sponsored, whether it's videos or segments into their long form content. And I think that has like primed the audience to trust advertising in the form of, yeah, like user generated content, stuff that's not, the most polished. And, agreeing with Haley, I think it's absolutely here to stay. And I think what we're kind of seeing now is like this homeostasis of where UGC should have always been sitting in terms of like the advertising environment. Because, going back to the pandemic when it first came, the value of UGC was, super high because it was the only thing that you could do. But now, I think it's seen much more as, a tool to be used alongside traditional advertising content. And so I think that trend will continue. And UGC will continue to capitalize on trends and more like instant content rather than one ad that will be run for 4 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is.
My hot take is UGC is going to. I got a brief about 2 weeks ago, and on the top of the brief, it said, "Make ugly UGC." That's what they called it, this brand, ugly. They wanted ugly UGC. And I was like, oh, wow, that's brilliant. And then it was backed up. I was on set last week on a on a skincare product. And I was talking to the social media manager for the big brand, and she kind of underlined and saying that the UGC that they were creating that was performing the best was really the sloppiest. It was really the less expected. And again, this was a skincare product, the less expected beauty queens and kings. It was really the stuff that was coming out of left field was what was performing for them. So, especially as you start talking about AI, and AI is obviously the conversation du jour across social media and how it's taking this space as well. But I don't think there's going to be any real life for any of that in this space. It's completely contradictory. So my hot take for the future is like I'm interested to see if UGC continues to get more and more authentic, more and more scrappy, more and more fun, and I hope it does.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned AI, because my next question was gonna be, and if you guys don't, all good. Like, how can brands use AI or analytical tools to optimize UGC performance in real time? Is there space for AI in that regard?
I think there's space for when it comes to analytics or even, you know, refining a script a little bit to change the tone in any way that might need possible, but I don't see it honestly in the actual production side of things, just because I think you lose all the personality and, I think that you can pick AI out, when it comes to, like, production. So I foresee it being a great tool for, yeah, analytics and how to, like, help with, like, future campaigns, but I wouldn't say that it's going to thrive in the actual production side of things.
Yeah, I think kind of off of what Haley was saying, I think the general population's ability to identify AI is growing faster than AI's ability to fool people. And if the number one goal of UGC is authentic, creative, you can't have your viewer being like, well, that's not real. That kind of undermines the entire point of it. And so, um, and not just because I'll be out of a job if AI, takes it over. I do think on the creative side, there's a lot of improving for AI to do before it can be seriously considered as an alternative or even an asset in like the actual creative process or creating process.
I think to bring it full circle to with, UGC creating a lot of trust of consumers with brands, I think that the trust is a little bit broken when you see an AI generated person with the product because it's like it's fake versus like the whole reason behind UGC is creating very authentic, real content. And so that's where I think, especially in the UGC space, maybe different with like product shots. But like when it comes to like the personality of UGC, I just don't see AI taking that over.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've noticed from some brands I worked with in the past, um, there's a lot more tagging of things that are AI. Like it's tagged as AI, whether that's on Meta or it's on Instagram or what have you. And from brands that I've worked with in the past, they've seen, not a good review from from their customers, as it relates to all those kind of ads that were tagged with AI, and they have no control over the tag. Like, it's that platform that's tagging it. So, um, yeah, very interesting take. What about you, Jonathan?
Well, there's going to be a flood of AI type UGC. I think we're going to see it soon. And there's this awesome saying: when everyone's going left, go right. And I think it's an opportunity for any nimble, smart brand to pivot on that. And I don't think any AI user generated content is going to break through. I mean, I could be really wrong about that. I'm sure someone will figure it out, crack the code. But I'm looking for that brand who zags when everybody zigs. I'm looking for that brand that wants to go left when everyone's going right. And I think there's going to be a lot to be mined from that spot in the next few years as technology continues to dominate the conversation. I think that's when people are going to look for real people.
Yeah, and speaking of that, speaking of kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging and going left when everyone else is going right, have you guys ever had to pivot, you know, a UGC campaign, but based off of performance data? And kind of what were those insights that drove that change?
Oh, not me. I mean, because our stuff is always right on. No. Of course, we always adjust what we do based upon a brand's reporting on how the last campaign we did performed. And I've been lucky enough to stick with repeat clients for years, some of them. And we do adjust what we do always based upon results, if that's the question. I mean, that's central to being a good partner.
Yeah, I guess how does that look like when you are making an adjustment before, within that campaign, based off of the content, already provided. How does that look? How does that look on um the UGC side?
I think that we have opportunity in pre-production to make sure we're shooting a few different takes, like when it comes to like hooks and maybe a few of like the key messaging that, in post production, we could pivot a little bit of like rearranging that video. We try to like get everything in pre production and make sure that in post, like the client is super happy and that it performs. But I think that, you know, that doesn't always happen. And kind of hearing from the client, like what the roadblocks of what is, maybe making it not perform as well? Is it the length? Is it the talent that like maybe we we shouldn't be using that talent at all, or we just needed it was too lengthy and not enough hitting like the um, key messaging home. I think there's a lot of different elements of like why it might not be performing, but at the end of the day, I think brands need to test like a ton of different types of talent to know what type of talent is resonating, because at the end of a lot of times it does come down to the talent versus the message.
And what I'm also hearing is like seeing, like a key point that the brand wants to get across, saying it in multiple different ways. Maybe not only in multiple different ways, but saying it in multiple different angles, or, in different places, within a home, or, stuff like that, kind of like what you were saying with just multiple takes, just like giving a huge variety of different things, I think could help uh, people watching, brands watching, when deciding to do UGC.
One of the big advantages of UGC is the cost. I mean, that's where cost can really work in a brand's favor. I mean, because it's relatively inexpensive, you can produce a lot of content. And, if something's not performing, lean into what is performing. And that's a really good way to optimize and to look at a project as a whole. I mean, if you can produce 6 or 7 or 12 pieces of content for the same budget as you might produce a more polished ad, awesome. If ad number 6 performs better than ad number 5, well, you know what to do. And sometimes it's intangible. What is it about that thing that made it really resonate? You never know. And that's beautiful. I mean, that's just the very essence of what this is all about, and what's so beautiful about human beings and people. And you never know who's going to connect exactly and why. But when they do, they do.
And I think like off of the cost point, sometimes like I think like a good way to view it is the data or the analytics that you're receiving kind of have more value than the actual piece of creative. Because, with UGC, the approach is much more creative and, getting it out there and finding, what people are really responding to. And, while I agree with everything that's said, just to add more, I think there are, other elements that are to be considered or can, cause something to pivot, like simply like time of year. Something that like comes to mind is, depending on the product, if it's perfume, for example, maybe, 11 months of the year, if your, target demographic is women in their 30s, they might be buying it for themselves. 2 weeks before Christmas, you're probably going to want male talent talking to a male audience to be like, hey, go buy that. Same for, the first week of February. When you're in the creative position, sometimes you get that feedback a little bit late, and sometimes it means recasting, or pivoting in the casting process, or it's how can we combine some of the footage with this, from a previous shoot with male talent to bring into this ad, and relying on some of the existing assets to I guess pivot you in the right direction or the newly informed direction.
Thank you guys for this. One last question in closing. What advice would you give brands that are hesitant to, fully embrace UGC as part of their marketing strategy? It seems at this point it's few and far between, but for those that are still kind of hesitant on, and that could be even increasing the budget and attention on UGC, um, marketing initiatives. What are some advice would you give to those brands that are still hesitant?
I will say there's no vertical or type of brand I haven't worked with over the last few years with UGC. So I think that if a brand's hesitant, knowing that they're going to be left behind, and that there is like, there's talent out there for your unique brand. Like I've worked with every type of spec of talent, that you're losing money on the table by not creating UGC?
I think just what I would say is it's it will probably feel, uncomfortable at first because it's a new process, it's a new form. But when you find, great people like me and Jonathan to help you out, it can be very painless. And I think there's a very steep learning curve to getting assets out very quickly. So if there's something that you're seeking feedback or data on in almost real time, 2 weeks can be a realistic timeline if you have a clear vision from, the moment you start working on something to the moment it's published. And just having the accessibility and flexibility in that, I think allows brands to capitalize on opportunity in a way that, traditional production doesn't allow for.
Oh, I get the last word? I would say, I really like what both of you said, and it's really true. For any brand who's sticking around in the marketplace and is serious about digging in, you have to be creating UGC at this moment. And what I would say to them as advice is, rather than think about creating one piece of UGC, think about creating systems. You need to be creating UGC quite often and look for partners, real partners who you vibe with. And when I say the partner, I don't necessarily mean the UGC creator. I mean, whether you're going to use a platform, whether you're going to use a producer, whether you're going to use whatever title you want to give. Find real partners who not just find three creators, who create a farm system, who create spreadsheets of, okay, here's 20 creators, and maybe we're going to use 1, 5, and 9 on January, and maybe we're going to use 6, 8, and 3 for April, and creating these UGC pipelines and systems with people you trust and people who really can collaborate with you and you like working with, using creating tool sets, creating pipelines, because the more you optimize that kind of thinking, that mindset for this, you're going to lower costs, you're going to improve quality, and you're going to have more fun in the process of going to work, rather than reinventing the wheel every time you need to create 6 UGC assets.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate this. For everyone watching, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and to Haley, Patrick, Jonathan. Again, really appreciate it. Maybe we could have a part two, and sometime down the future, and seeing how everything shakes out. But appreciate your time, and you guys have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.